What would you do if you had discovered that an entire family had vanished from a remote island community, leaving behind only whispers of unspeakable rituals and a legacy of fear that still haunts locals nearly a century later? The cool Atlantic breeze carries secrets across the jagged cliffs of Ilha dos Corvos, where the crumbling remains of the Caetano estate stand as a silent monument to one of the most disturbing cases in Portuguese colonial history. The weathered stones seem to absorb the mist that rolls in from the sea, just as they once absorbed the sounds that no one in the nearby village dared acknowledge. This is the story of a family whose obsession with forbidden practices led to their downfall, and whose secrets were nearly lost to time, until one curious historian stumbled upon a collection of sealed documents in a forgotten archive. The year was 1933, and while the world focused on economic depression and political upheaval, something far more insidious was unfolding on a tiny island off the Portuguese coast. If what you are about to hear disturbs you, remember that understanding our darkest chapters helps ensure they remain firmly in the past. For those who appreciate these historical investigations into the macabre corners of human behavior, consider subscribing to support more such documentaries. The morning of June 17, 1933, began like any other for Manuel Chea, a postal worker responsible for delivering mail to the more remote areas of Ilha dos Corvos. The island, whose name translates to Island of Ravens, had always been a place of superstition, with its black volcanic rocks and persistent fog. But nothing in the local folklore had prepared Manuel for what he would encounter at the Caetano estate that morning. As he approached the grand colonial house perched on the eastern cliffs, he immediately sensed something was wrong. The usual sounds of the estate were absent. No servants tending the gardens, no smoke from the kitchen chimney, no distant voices from the family's private beach below. Manuel would later tell authorities that he felt an unnatural stillness, as if the very air around the property had congealed. The wrought iron gate stood partially open, creaking softly in the salt-laden wind. Scattered across the gravel driveway were odd items: a woman's silk scarf, a broken pocket watch, a child's doll with its porcelain face shattered. Most disturbing of all was the trail of what appeared to be salt crystals, forming a line from the main house down toward the private cove that only the Caetano family used. "I called out several times, but no one answered," Manuel stated in his official testimony. "I had a registered letter for Senor Caetano that required a signature, so I had no choice but to approach the house. That's when I noticed the door was ajar, and there was a strange smell coming from inside. Not decay, nothing so obvious, but something like burned sugar mixed with the scent of the tide at low ebb. When Manuel pushed open the heavy oak door, the interior of the mansion revealed a scene of apparent disorder that defied easy explanation. Furniture was arranged in concentric circles in the main hall. Mirrors had been covered with black cloth. On the dining table, 8 place settings had been meticulously arranged, though the Caetano family only consisted of 6 members. The food on the plates was untouched, but had been arranged in precise geometric patterns that Manuel described as resembling stars or perhaps flowers with too many petals. Most disturbing of all, according to his statement, was a large leather-bound book open on a pedestal in the center of the room, its pages covered with handwritten text in what appeared to be a mixture of Portuguese and another language he didn't recognize. Manuel's discovery marked the beginning of what would become known locally as the Caetano incident. Though official records would remain sealed for nearly 50 years under the classification of family matter of moral concern, the postal worker immediately reported his findings to the island's sole police officer, Sergeant Duarte Oliveira, who accompanied him back to the estate within the hour. What they found upon their return would only deepen the mystery. According to the police report filed by Sergeant Oliveira, when they returned to the property, several significant changes had occurred. The book was gone from its pedestal. The food had been removed from the dining table, and most notably, a trail of wet footprints led from the private beach entrance up through the house and out the front door. The footprints, Oliveira noted with particular concern, did not appear to be made by conventional shoes or bare feet, but rather elongated impressions with what appeared to be too many toes spread wide, as if the foot inside had been distorted. The investigation that followed would uncover a history so disturbing that many official documents were subsequently destroyed by order of the regional governor, with only duplicate copies preserved in a sealed archive in Lisbon. These documents remained untouched until 2011, when historian Dr. Elena Carvalho discovered them while researching colonial-era family structures for her doctoral thesis. What she found within those yellowed pages would force her to reconsider the entire focus of her academic work. "I expected to find typical records of a wealthy colonial family," Dr. Carvalho explained in her subsequent paper on the subject. "Tax documents, perhaps some correspondence with the mainland authorities. Instead, I found detailed accounts of an investigation into practices so aberrant that I initially believed I was reading fiction or the ravings of a disturbed official." The Caetano family had arrived on Ilha dos Corvos in 1875, when Portuguese industrialist Mateus Caetano purchased nearly a third of the island's land, including the entire eastern peninsula with its sheltered cove. The family's wealth came from shipping and textile interests on the mainland, but according to local records, Mateus had relocated his entire household after a scandal in Lisbon that no one would speak of directly. He arrived with his wife Leonor, their 3 children, and Leonor's unmarried sister Constanza. They immediately began construction of their isolated mansion, employing only mainland workers who left as soon as the project was completed. For the next 5 decades, the Caetanos maintained a strange position in island society. They were undeniably the wealthiest residents, controlling much of the local economy through their ownership of the small port and several businesses. Yet they remained perpetual outsiders, rarely participating in community events and never allowing islanders inside their home, except for a select few servants who were paid extraordinary wages for both their labor and their discretion. What the investigation following their disappearance revealed was that the Caetanos had been engaged in what the documents repeatedly referred to as unnatural familial practices from the time of their arrival. The nature of these practices was only alluded to in the most clinical terms in official reports, but statements from former servants collected by Sergeant Oliveira painted a more explicit picture. "They worshipped something in the sea," stated Maria Faria, who had worked as a cook for the family for 3 years before quitting in 1929. "Every full moon, they would go down to the cove, all of them naked as the day they were born, even the old grandmother, who must have been 70 by then. They would wade into the water and stay there for hours, no matter how cold it was. Sometimes I would hear singing in a language that wasn't Portuguese or any other language I know. And when they came back inside, they would be with each other in ways family shouldn't." Maria's testimony was corroborated by other former employees, though most were reluctant to provide specific details. One gardener, who requested his name be redacted from all records, described finding unusual modifications to the cove area over his years of employment. "They built something under the water," he claimed. "Something like an altar made of black stones arranged in a circle. And there were carvings on those stones that made my eyes hurt to look at them. Fish wouldn't swim near that part of the cove anymore. Even the gulls avoided it. What they found next would change everything about the investigation. When authorities finally explored the Caetanos' private beach and the waters of the cove, they discovered an underwater structure that defied simple explanation. Municipal engineer Antonio Medeiros was called to examine and document the find. His technical drawings, preserved in the Lisbon archives, show a series of concentric stone circles with a central platform, all constructed with a precision that would have required significant engineering knowledge. Carved into these stones were symbols that Medeiros refused to reproduce in his official documentation, noting only that they appeared to predate any known Portuguese or even European symbolic language. More disturbing than the structure itself was what they found secured to the central platform. According to Sergeant Oliveira's report, dated June 21, 1933, chained to the stone table were 3 objects of unknown origin or purpose. The first appears to be a statue or possibly a preserved biological specimen, approximately 100 centimeters in length, resembling a human female form but with significant anatomical differences, particularly in the facial structure and extremities. The second object is a sphere of some metallic substance that emits a faint glow and seems to change color when viewed from different angles. The third is a book bound in what our physician reluctantly identified as human skin, containing hundreds of pages of text in the same unknown language found in the Caetano home, interspersed with anatomical drawings of an explicit and disturbing nature. But there was one detail no one dared to mention in the official reports that only came to light through Dr. Carvalho's discovery of personal correspondence between Sergeant Oliveira and his superior on the mainland. In a letter marked "For Your Eyes Only," Oliveira confessed that when they removed the three objects from the underwater platform, they discovered that the stone itself was warm to the touch, despite being submerged in the cold Atlantic waters. More alarmingly, he claimed that the platform appeared to be breathing with a slow, rhythmic motion that all present witnessed but none could explain. The investigation into the Caetano family's disappearance took a darker turn when authorities began interviewing the few islanders who had maintained any contact with the family in the months leading up to their vanishing. Teresa Duarte, who delivered fresh fish to the estate twice weekly, reported increasingly strange behavior from all family members. They began to look different, she stated. Their skin had a sheen to it, almost like it was damp even when they were indoors. Their eyes seemed larger, and the whites had taken on a yellowish tint. The youngest daughter, Mariana, who would have been about 16 then, had developed strange ridges along her neck that she tried to hide with high collars and scarves. When I asked if she was ill, her mother gave me such a look of hatred that I never inquired again. According to financial records found in Mateus Caetano's study, the family had been making substantial purchases of salt, formaldehyde, and various chemicals typically used in preservation. They had also imported specialized glass tanks from Germany, along with equipment for maintaining water at specific temperatures and salinities. None of these items were found on the property during the initial search, leading investigators to speculate that they had been moved to another location or destroyed. However, a detailed examination of the mansion's architecture revealed something even more disturbing. Behind a false wall in the cellar, investigators discovered a hidden chamber that connected to a natural sea cave below the property. This chamber, according to Sergeant Oliveira's report, contained evidence of extensive biological experimentation of a nature that cannot be fully detailed in this document. What he did record was the discovery of numerous journals written in Mateus Caetano's hand, documenting what appeared to be attempts to achieve permanent transformation through controlled breeding and chemical catalysts. Accompanying these journals were detailed family trees tracing the Caetano lineage back nearly 300 years, with certain individuals marked with strange symbols. Alongside these were anatomical drawings showing human figures with progressive physical alterations, elongated fingers with developing webbing, changes to the structure of the ribcage and spine, and modifications to the respiratory system that suggested an attempt to enable underwater breathing. But what had happened to the family themselves? Despite an island-wide search involving police from the mainland and even military personnel, no trace of the 6 Caetanos was ever officially found. No bodies, no luggage suggesting escape, not even personal items one would normally take when leaving permanently. It was as if they had simply walked into the sea and disappeared. Until one piece of the puzzle revealed the unthinkable 7 months later, when a fishing boat operating near the island caught something unusual in their nets. The official report described it as a humanoid specimen, showing significant aquatic adaptations, with webbed extremities, gill-like structures along the ribcage, and a facial structure that, while severely distorted, retained enough human characteristics to match dental records with those of Mariana Caetano, the youngest daughter of the family. The specimen was immediately confiscated by mainland authorities and transported to Lisbon for examination. Dr. Miguel Santos, the government physician who performed the examination, provided a clinical account that stops just short of the impossible. The subject appears to be in a state of incomplete metamorphosis between human and some unknown marine form. While genetic testing was not available in 1934, bone structure and dental records confirm this was once Mariana Caetano. The modifications to her anatomy are extensive and show both surgical intervention and what appears to be genuine biological adaptation. The latter should not be scientifically possible in a single generation, yet the evidence suggests otherwise. Dr. Santos noted with particular concern that many of the anatomical changes matched precisely the progressive modifications illustrated in Mateus Caetano's journals, suggesting that whatever process the family had initiated had followed their anticipated course. Most disturbing of all was his conclusion that the specimen had been alive until very recently, before being caught in the nets, and that the cause of death appeared to be exposure to air rather than drowning. The discovery of Mariana Caetano's transformed body led to renewed searches of the waters around the family's private cove. Using the most advanced diving equipment available at the time, investigators explored the underwater structure more thoroughly and made a series of discoveries that were deemed so sensitive that all documentation was separated from the main case file and restricted to the highest levels of government. Dr. Carvalho's discovery of these restricted files revealed what the divers had found. According to their reports, the stone circles contained a series of underwater chambers hewn into the bedrock of the island itself. Within these chambers were living spaces adapted for underwater habitation, including air pockets maintained by some unknown mechanism. Personal belongings of all Caetano family members were found in these chambers, along with equipment for continuing their experiments. Most significant was the discovery of several glass tanks containing what the lead diver described as embryonic specimens showing a hybrid morphology that combines human features with distinctly non-human characteristics. Next, to these tanks were journals continuing Mateus Caetano's work. The last entry dated just 2 days before the discovery of the empty house. That final entry, reproduced in part in the restricted files, provides the only explanation in the Caetano's own words for what they had been attempting. The transformation progresses as anticipated. Leonor and Constanza have fully developed the secondary respiratory system, and even little Eduardo can now remain submerged for nearly 3 hours without surfacing. The genetic material from the specimen has successfully bonded with our own, though the process remains painful. We have decided that the time has come for the final phase. Tonight, under the dark moon, we will complete the ritual and commit ourselves fully to the water. Our terrestrial affairs are in order. The servants have been dismissed with generous compensation. Soon we will join our true ancestors beneath the waves, where we will complete our evolution and fulfill the pact made by my great-grandfather when he first encountered them off the coast of Brazil in 1768. If any should find this record, know that we go willingly to claim our rightful heritage. We are not the first family to make this journey, and we will not be the last. Look to the water. We have always been there watching and waiting for those with the courage to return. The investigation was officially closed in 1935 with the conclusion that the Caetano family had perished in a tragic maritime incident, likely involving their private yacht, which was also missing. The property was seized by the government, and the mansion was abandoned. The underwater structures were destroyed with explosives, and the entire cove was declared off-limits due to unstable geological conditions. The true findings of the investigation were sealed, and those involved were sworn to secrecy under threat of prosecution. However, no one could silence the island's residents, who developed their own understanding of what had happened to the Caetano family. Local legends speak of strange figures sometimes seen swimming in the waters near the abandoned estate, particularly on moonless nights. Fishermen report unusual interference with their equipment when operating near the eastern peninsula, and several have described hearing what sounds like singing coming from beneath the waves in a language no one recognizes. In 1958, a team of geologists studying the island's volcanic structures reported an unusual discovery near the former Caetano Cove. Although the underwater stone circles had supposedly been destroyed, sonar mapping revealed new structures in deeper water, nearly half a kilometer from shore. When a diving team was sent to investigate, one diver failed to return. The others reported seeing movement at the edge of visibility and feeling watched by intelligent presences. The missing diver's body was never recovered, and the geological survey was abandoned shortly thereafter. Dr. Carvalho's research into the Caetano case ended abruptly in 2014 when her access to the restricted archives was suddenly revoked without explanation. Her subsequent requests for information were denied, and her partially completed manuscript on the subject was rejected by multiple academic publishers, citing ethical concerns and unsubstantiated claims. I was told in no uncertain terms to pursue other research interests, Dr. Carvalho revealed in a rare interview before her academic career ended. What I found most disturbing was not the historical case itself, but the active suppression of information still occurring nearly 80 years later. Someone doesn't want this story told, which only makes me more certain that there's more to it than even I discovered. The most recent chapter in this disturbing saga came in 2020, when marine biologists conducting a census of Atlantic marine life reported unusual genetic anomalies in specimens collected near Ilha dos Corvos. DNA sequencing revealed what one researcher described as impossible hybridization between human genetic markers and an unidentified marine species. The study was discontinued shortly after these findings were reported internally, and no public paper was ever published. What makes the Caetano case particularly disturbing is not just the nature of their experiments or their apparent transformation, but the implication in Matteo Caetano's final journal entry that they were not unique. His reference to other families making this journey suggests an organized effort spanning generations and possibly continents. The mention of a pact made in Brazil in the 18th century indicates a much longer history than the official investigation ever uncovered. Portuguese naval records from the colonial period, which Dr. Carvalho managed to access before her research was terminated, show that Mateus Caetano's great-grandfather, Antonio Caetano, had indeed been a ship's captain operating between Portugal and its Brazilian colonies. In 1768, his vessel was reported missing for 3 months before mysteriously reappearing off the coast of Lisbon with Antonio as the sole survivor. According to the official report, he claimed to have been the only one spared from a fever that killed his crew. But witnesses described him as changed in aspect and manner, as if he were no longer fully himself. Antonio Caetano subsequently amassed considerable wealth through means that were never fully explained and established the family's shipping business. Not historical records show that each generation of Caetanos thereafter showed an unusual interest in marine biology, often funding expeditions to study deep-sea life. Several family members were noted for their eccentricities, particularly an aversion to bright light and a preference for cold, damp environments. The legal consequences of the Caetano case were surprisingly limited. Despite evidence of what would now be classified as medical experimentation, desecration of human remains, and possibly murder, given the human skin used to bind one of the books, no charges were ever filed against any surviving family members, if indeed any survived in human form. The entire matter was treated as a private family tragedy, with public records showing only that the estate was reclaimed by the government due to abandonment. The social impact on Ilha dos Corvos was more profound and lasting. Many families chose to leave the island in the years following the incident, citing an uncomfortable atmosphere and declining economic opportunities after the closure of Caetano-owned businesses. Those who remained developed strict taboos regarding the Eastern Peninsula. Children were taught never to swim in certain areas, and a local tradition began of performing protective rituals before fishing vessels left port. By the 1970s, the island's population had dwindled to less than 100 residents, most elderly. Today, it is primarily a nature reserve with a small seasonal tourism industry focused on birdwatching and hiking, though guides uniformly refuse to take visitors to the ruins of the Caetano estate, which continues to decay on its clifftop perch. The scientific implications of the case, if the evidence is taken at face value, are profoundly disturbing. The Caetano experiments suggest possibilities of human transformation that modern biology would consider impossible. Dr. Santos's examination of the transformed Mariana Caetano described physiological changes that would require fundamental genetic restructuring far beyond what medical science of the 1930s could achieve or even what current genetic engineering can accomplish. More troubling is the ecological question of what might still exist in the waters around Ilha dos Corvos. If the Caetano family truly did transform themselves and continue to live beneath the waves, what has happened to them in the intervening decades? Have they reproduced, evolved further, created an underwater society? The reports of genetic anomalies in marine life near the island suggest an ongoing influence that defies conventional explanation. From an anthropological perspective, the Caetano case represents a dark intersection of wealth, isolation, and obsession. The family's ability to pursue their disturbing goals was facilitated by their economic power and the remote location they chose. Island communities with their limited resources and dependency on wealthy patrons can be particularly vulnerable to exploitation by those with aberrant intentions. Dr. Carvalho, before the abrupt end of her research, had begun exploring connections between the Caetano case and similar incidents in other coastal regions around the world. She identified several wealthy families with maritime connections who had similarly withdrawn from society to isolated coastal properties, only to disappear under mysterious circumstances. In each case, local legends subsequently emerged about strange figures seen in nearby waters. There's a pattern that becomes visible once you know what to look for, she noted in her unpublished research notes. A wealthy family with shipping connections, purchase of isolated coastal property, importation of specialized equipment, gradual withdrawal from society, reports of physical changes observed by servants or delivery people, and finally, a disappearance that is never fully explained. I found at least 7 cases that follow this template between 1850 and 1960 on 3 different continents. Although Dr. Carvalho was prevented from publishing her complete findings, fragments of her research have appeared online in recent years, attracting attention from both academic circles and conspiracy theorists. Some have attempted to continue her work, focusing particularly on genetic testing of marine life in areas associated with these mysterious disappearances. One independent researcher, who publishes online under the pseudonym Deep Dweller, claims to have obtained tissue samples from unusual marine specimens captured near former Caetano properties in both Portugal and Brazil. According to their unverified reports, these specimens show humanoid characteristics at a cellular level and possess novel protein structures that could facilitate oxygen absorption directly through the skin. The questions raised by the Caetano case remain largely unanswered. Was this a case of mass delusion, elaborate fraud, or genuine transformation? Did the family perish in their misguided experiments? Or did they achieve their apparent goal of underwater existence? And perhaps most disturbingly, if Mateus Caetano's final journal entry is to be believed, how many other families have followed the same path throughout history? What we know with certainty is that in 1933, 6 members of a wealthy Portuguese family vanished from their island estate, leaving behind evidence of disturbing experiments aimed at transforming themselves into marine creatures. One family member was later found in a partially transformed state that defied medical explanation. Underwater structures were discovered that suggested preparation for subaquatic habitation, and genetic anomalies continue to be reported in marine life surrounding the area nearly a century later. For those living near Ilha dos Corvos, the legacy of the Caetanos is not an abstract historical curiosity, but a living presence that continues to influence local culture. Fishermen still avoid certain waters after dark. Parents still warn children not to swim too far from shore. And on quiet nights, when the fog rolls in from the Atlantic, some claim to hear distant singing in an unknown language coming from somewhere beneath the waves. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of this case is not what we know, but what remains hidden. Dr. Carvalho's research was halted before she could fully explore the connections between the Caetano incident and similar cases worldwide. The Portuguese government continues to restrict access to the complete case files, and marine biologists report ongoing interference with research conducted in waters near the former Caetano property. As recently as last year, a documentary film crew attempting to explore the underwater area near the Caetano Cove reported equipment failures and unusual sonar readings that their technical experts could not explain. Their permits were revoked before they could complete their work, citing environmental concerns that were never specifically detailed. If the Caetanos did indeed transform themselves through some combination of forbidden science and ancient ritual, what does that suggest about the malleable nature of human biology? And if such transformation is possible, who else might have attempted it throughout history? The ocean's depths remain largely unexplored, with new species discovered regularly. Could some of these discoveries be not entirely natural in origin? The case of the Caetano family serves as a disturbing reminder of how quickly human nature can be corrupted by obsession, and how easily the boundary between science and madness can blur in isolation. It also raises profound questions about what might exist in the liminal spaces between established categories of life, neither fully human nor fully other, watching from the shadows beneath the waves. For the residents of Ilha dos Corvos, the empty mansion on the cliff stands as a monument to these unanswered questions. Though tourism officials have occasionally suggested renovating the property as a historical attraction, local opposition has always prevented such plans from proceeding. The current caretaker of the island's small museum, Manuel Oliveira, grandson of the sergeant who led the original investigation, perhaps best summarized the community's feelings when he said, "Some doors are better left closed, some places better left unvisited." The Caetanos made their choice. Let them keep their secrets beneath the water where they belong. And yet, on nights when the moon is absent and the tide is high, fishermen still report seeing lights moving beneath the surface near the eastern peninsula. Electronic equipment malfunctions with unusual frequency in those waters. And occasionally, though no one will admit it officially, Unidentifiable footprints are found on the beach below the abandoned mansion, leading from the water to the sealed entrance of the sea cave and back again. What goes on in the depths beyond human sight? What legacy did the Caetanos leave behind in the cold Atlantic waters? And most disturbing of all, if their transformation was successful, and they have continued to reproduce in their new form, how many of their descendants might now be watching from just beyond the reach of our vision, waiting for the right moment to make contact with those they left behind on land? The answers, if they exist, remain hidden beneath the waves in the company of whatever the Caetano family became.